The rain hadn't stopped all day. The city lights shimmered on the wet asphalt like scattered diamonds. Okay? And inside the Aurelian, the most expensive restaurant in town, laughter and crystal clinks filled the air. Every guest seemed to belong, their elegant dresses, tailored suits, expensive perfumes. And then she walked in. Maya stood hesitantly at the entrance, her faded coat dripping rainwater, her shoes caked with mud. Her hair was a tangled mess, and the strap of her old canvas bag was fraying at the edge. The hostess almost mistook her for someone lost, perhaps a delivery girl. But Maya's trembling voice was calm as she whispered, "Reservation for Daniel Pierce." Heads turned. Whispers followed her as she walked through the hall. A beggar, they thought. What was she doing here? A waiter even stepped forward to stop her, but the hostess confirmed the name and led her to a corner table. There, seated in a perfectly cut black suit, was Daniel Pierce Young, poised. It's the kind of man whose every move radiated quiet authority. CEO of Pierce Innovations, a name that echoed through magazines and news headlines. He looked up from his phone, and for a moment, his blue-gray eyes froze. She wasn't what he expected, not even close. His assistant had set up this blind date after months of persuasion. He'd agreed only because he was tired of shallow smiles and gold-plated hearts. But as Maya sat across from him, soaked, embarrassed, yet somehow unshaken, something in him paused. I'm sorry, she began softly, pulling the hood from her head. I didn't mean to come looking like this. My bus broke down, and then he raised his hand slightly, stopping her mid-sentence. It's all right, Daniel said, his tone calm but curious. You made it. Her eyes flickered with surprise. Most people would have laughed or left, but he didn't. He simply waved to the waiter and asked for 2 coffees instead of the pre-ordered 7-course meal. Let's start simple, he said, his lips curving faintly. She nodded, though her cheeks burned with humiliation. Around them, other diners whispered and giggled behind expensive menus. She could hear a woman mutter, "She must be lost." Someone else snickered, "Look at her shoes." But Daniel's focus never wavered from her. He asked questions about her day, about where she worked, and each time she hesitated, he listened as if every word mattered. Still, she couldn't understand why he wasn't judging her. When she finally said, half smiling, "You must think I'm ridiculous," he replied, "Actually, I think you're brave." Something in the way he said, "It's steady, sincere," made her chest tighten. For the first time that night, she smiled fully, but just as she started to relax, the restaurant doors burst open. 2 men ran in, panicked, shouting, "Call an ambulance. There's been an accident outside." Guests gasped and scattered toward the window. Maya turned Dan without a thought. She bolted from her seat and sprinted out into the rain. Daniel froze for half a second, then rushed after her. Outside, chaos awaited. Screeching tires, a small crowd, and in the middle of the street, Maya knelt beside a fallen child, pressing her hands over a bleeding wound, shouting for help with a voice that cut through the storm. Daniel could only stand there, stunned, as he watched this woman, this stranger he'd just met, risk everything without hesitation. The night that began in judgment was about to change both their lives forever. Rain hammered the pavement like thousands of tiny drums as Maya pressed down on the little boy's wound. Her trembling hands red with blood. "It's okay, sweetheart. Stay with me," she whispered, her voice both calm and urgent. The boy whimpered, trying to breathe. A twisted bicycle lay beside him, its front wheel spinning helplessly in the puddle. Daniel arrived seconds later, his expensive shoes splashing into the muddy water. "What happened?" he called out, bending beside her. A car ran the light. Maya gasped, not looking up. He was crossing alone. She tore off her scarf and tied it tightly around the boy's leg, improvising a tourniquet. Daniel had seen emergencies before at boardrooms, hospitals. He donated to, but never like this. This was raw, human chaos. Yet this woman, dressed like a beggar, was the only one doing something. Ambulance is coming. Someone shouted from behind. Daniel nodded, taking off his jacket and draping it over the boy's shivering body. The child's breathing steadied slightly, and Maya exhaled in relief. Her hair soaked and sticking to her face. "Hey," Daniel murmured softly. "You did great." She shook her head. "No, I just couldn't stand by." Her voice cracked, and for a moment Daniel saw more than courage. He saw pain, like she'd been here before. Like saving this child was her way of undoing an old wound. The flashing lights of the ambulance sliced through the night. Paramedics rushed in, lifting the boy onto a stretcher. As they drove off, the onlookers drifted away, leaving only the two of them standing in the rain. Maya looked down at her hands, red and shaking. "I should have stayed inside. I probably scared your date off completely," she said with a weak laugh. But Daniel's eyes softened. "You think that's what I care about right now?" Something unspoken passed between them, something that felt heavier than words. The storm around them had calmed, but inside, both hearts raced like thunder. He led her back toward the restaurant, but she stopped halfway, glancing at the boy's blood still staining her palms. "I can't go back in there," she whispered. "Not like this." Daniel hesitated, then removed his own silk handkerchief and gently wiped her hands clean. His touch was careful, almost reverent. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "You already showed me more tonight than most people do in a lifetime." For the first time, Maya looked up and met his eyes, truly met them. Beneath the sleek confidence and CEO polish, she saw a man quietly awed by her. And for a moment, she forgot the humiliation, the whispers, the pitying stares. But just as Daniel was about to ask her something, perhaps her name, perhaps why she carried so much sadness, a familiar voice interrupted. "Daniel." He turned. A tall woman stood under an umbrella, perfectly dressed, her expression cold and sharp. His assistant, Clara, the one who had arranged the blind date. Her gaze flicked over Maya's soaked coat and messy hair with visible disgust. "I thought you'd be home by now," she said icily. Then, turning to Maya, she added, "And who, exactly, are you supposed to be?" Maya froze. Daniel stepped slightly in front of her, protective instinct rising, but Clara's smirk only deepened. "Interesting," she murmured. "So this is your type now." The storm outside might have ended, but inside, a new one was just beginning. Maya's breath caught in her throat as Clara's words sliced through the air. The other woman's tone dripped with disdain, her umbrella shielding her from the drizzle like a queen refusing to touch the earth. Around them, a few restaurant staff had stepped outside to watch the commotion, spring behind their hands. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Clara, that's enough," he said, his voice low but edged with warning. But Clara ignored him. Her eyes raked over Maya's torn sleeve, her muddy shoes, the damp strands clinging to her face. "You brought her here." She let out a bitter laugh. "Daniel, this is the Aurelia, not a soup kitchen." The words hit Maya like a slap. She flinched, clutching the strap of her worn-out bag. A deep flush of humiliation spread across her cheeks. "I should go," she murmured. "This was a mistake." "No," Daniel said quickly, stepping closer. "You're not going anywhere." Clara raised an eyebrow. "You're defending her? After one pity date?" Daniel's voice turned firm, the tone of a man used to commanding boardrooms. "She's not a pity anything. She's someone who just saved a child's life while everyone else stood by, including you, Clara." The air thickened. Even the rain seemed to pause, falling slower between them. Maya wanted to disappear, to melt into the pavement, but Daniel's steady presence beside her kept her from running. Still, Clara's laughter cold and hollow echoed too loudly. "Wow," she said mockingly. "You've really changed, Daniel. I guess money does buy a heart after all." Before Daniel could respond, she turned on her heel and stormed off into the night. leaving a faint trail of expensive perfume behind. Silence settled. Maya could feel the weight of every whisper from the restaurant staff. A waiter glanced at her pityingly before retreating inside. She wished the ground would swallow her whole. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You shouldn't have to defend me. I shouldn't have come." Daniel sighed softly, his anger melting into concern. "Maya, look at me." She hesitated, then lifted her eyes. His were kinder gentler than before, but steady as steel. "You have nothing to apologize for. You didn't do anything wrong." Her lips trembled into a faint, fragile smile. "You don't even know me." Kenny smiled back, faintly. "Maybe not yet, but I'd like to." Something about the way he said it quiet, unforced made her heart ache. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was real. But Maya knew better than to believe in moments like this. She'd been disappointed too many times before. She turned away, clutching her bag tighter. "You're kind, Daniel. But people like you and people like me, we live in different worlds." He took a slow breath. "Maybe those worlds aren't as far apart as you think." Before she could respond, his phone rang. A call he couldn't ignore. His face darkened as he saw the name on the screen, Clara. Again, he hesitated, looking torn. "I have to take this. Please wait here for me." Maya nodded, though something in her chest told her he wouldn't return. He walked a few steps away, voice low and tense. She stood in the drizzle, staring at the street where the ambulance had vanished earlier. Her reflection in a puddle looked tired, out of place, broken. Then she heard it. A sentence from Daniel's call, faint but sharp enough to cut. "Clara, that's not what this is. She's not Charity." Maya froze. Charity. The word hit her harder than the rain ever could. Her heart twisted, her throat burned, and, without another thought, she turned and walked away. Daniel spun around seconds later, realizing she was gone. Maya? But the street was empty. Only the rain answered him. Daniel searched the street until the rain turned to mist and the city lights blurred in his vision. But Maya was gone, swallowed by the night like she had never existed. He stood there, soaked, her name echoing in his mind, wondering how someone could leave such a mark after just a few hours. Days passed. He tried calling the number she'd written down at the beginning of their data-scrawled note on a napkin, but it was disconnected. His assistant claimed she couldn't find her anywhere. It was as if Maya had melted into the city itself. Just another forgotten face in the crowd. At the office, Daniel couldn't focus. He'd catch himself staring out the window, replaying that moment, her hands pressing over the child's wound, her trembling voice steady with courage. Something about her lingered deeper than logic. She wasn't polished, wasn't perfect, but there was something real, something he couldn't stop searching for. Meanwhile, across the city, Maya sat in a dimly lit one-room apartment above a laundromat. Her damp clothes hung on a line by the window. She had no TV, no internet, and no strength to replay the humiliation she'd endured. The whispers, Clara's cruel smirk, the look in Daniel's eyes when he said Charity. She told herself it didn't matter, that it was foolish to hope. But deep down, she couldn't forget the way he'd looked at her, not with judgment, but with something close to admiration. She brushed her fingers over the small scar on her wrist, a reminder of the accident that had changed everything years ago. Her brother, her only family, had died in a hit-and-run when she was 17. She'd been the one holding his hand in the street, begging for help while cars passed by. That night, she'd promised herself she'd never be the one who looked away. That's why she'd run into the rain. That's why she couldn't stand still. But people like Daniel belonged to another world, one that only noticed people like her when it was convenient. She'd seen that kind of kindness before, fleeting and hollow. She wouldn't let herself believe his was different. A week later, Daniel made a decision. He called Clara into his office. "Find her," he ordered simply. Clara scoffed. "You can't be serious." That woman was. He cut her off sharply. She saved a life. You didn't find her. Clara's lips tightened, but the look in Daniel's eyes told her not to argue. Days turned into weeks. Still nothing. Daniel started visiting local hospitals, children's shelters, even small cafes around the area of the accident. No one knew Amaya, the faded coat and tired eyes, until one morning fate intervened. Daniel was on his way to a charity event when his car stopped at a red light. Through the window, he saw her standing by a bus stop, handing out sandwiches to street kids, her smile gentle and unguarded. The same coat, the same eyes. His heart stuttered. "Stop the car," he said quickly. The driver looked confused, but obeyed. Daniel stepped out, his polished shoes splashing in the puddle. The city noise faded into a heartbeat as he called softly, "Maya." She turned, and froze. The look of shock in her eyes said everything. She hadn't expected to ever see him again, but before she could react, a voice from behind called out, "Miss Maya, we're short on boxes again." Daniel turned toward the voice, and his expression changed completely. The small food van parked behind her bore a logo. He knew all too well. It was his company's charity division, and she was working for him, without even realizing it. Asterisk. For a moment, Daniel stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Maya dressed in the same faded coat, her sleeves rolled up. Laughter soft and genuine, was surrounded by children holding food boxes stamped with the Pierce Foundation logo. His logo. She wasn't there for charity. She was the one running it. He walked closer, heart pounding, as the children scattered around her, giggling. She turned again, and when their eyes met this time, there was no mistaking its shock, its disbelief, then something she quickly tried to hide. "Daniel." Her voice trembled as she spoke his name, like it carried too many memories she hadn't planned to revisit. He smiled faintly. "I could say the same. Maya, I've been looking for you." She looked down at her hands, still gloved from handing out meals. "You shouldn't have." "I had to," he said quietly. "You disappeared without saying goodbye." Her lips pressed into a thin line. Some goodbyes are easier when left unsaid. Daniel wanted to argue, but he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the kind that went beyond sleepless nights. So he said nothing, only watching as she knelt to help a little girl zip her torn jacket. That small act, simple yet full of warmth, reminded him exactly why she had haunted his thoughts. When the last of the children left, he finally asked, "You work here?" She shrugged. "Volunteer. The foundation provides the food. I just help distribute." Heart twisted. "That foundation is mine." Her hands froze mid-motion. Slowly, she looked up, eyes wide. "Yours?" He nodded. "Pierce Foundation. My company funds it." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain began to fall again, light but steady. Then she let out a shaky laugh. "Of course it is. I should have known." He took a cautious step closer. "Maya, it doesn't have to mean anything bad." Her expression hardened. "Doesn't it? Everything I thought was mine turns out to belong to someone like you." She motioned toward the van. "Even the one thing that made me feel like I mattered." Daniel's chest ached at the bitterness in her tone. "You do matter. You have no idea how much." She shook her head, the rain tracing down her cheeks like tears. "You think I don't know how your world works? People like me are just a line item in someone's charity report." He flinched, but didn't step back. "That's not what this is. You're not a number to me." "Then what am I?" she asked softly, voice breaking. "A story you'll tell at your next board dinner. The girl who showed up in rags and made the CEO feel human again." Her words stung, but Daniel didn't move. "No," he said quietly. "You're the woman who reminded me what being human actually means." For the first time, she didn't look away. Something in his voice, honest, vulnerable, cracked through her walls. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. And then, just as she seemed about to respond, a small voice called out from behind, "Miss Maya, the delivery truck's here." Maya blinked, turning away from him. "I have to go," she murmured. "Maya, wait." But she was already walking toward the van, disappearing behind the line of children. Once more, Daniel stood there in the rain, watching her go, feeling the same emptiness that had haunted him since that night at the Aurelia. Only this time, he knew something for certain. He wasn't letting her vanish again. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. Every image of Maya replayed in his mind, the way she'd run into the street without hesitation, the hurt in her eyes when she'd overheard the word charity, the quiet strength she carried even when the world had tried to crush her. He realized he'd spent his entire life surrounded by people who pretended to care, but she acted, without cameras, without an audience, just heart. By morning, he'd made up his mind. He called his driver and told him to cancel every meeting for the day. Then he opened the file on the Pierce Foundation, the same one Maya volunteered for, and began digging. Within hours, he found her application form. She hadn't asked for money, hadn't even listed a last name, just Maya R. Had a handwritten note. "I know what it feels like to be forgotten. I just want to make sure fewer people feel that way." Something in him broke open. He showed up at the shelter later that afternoon, sleeves rolled up, no suit, no driver, just himself. The volunteers were surprised to see him carrying boxes instead of giving speeches. When Maya arrived, she froze in the doorway, stunned. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" He smiled faintly. "Learning what real work looks like." She tried to protest. "You don't have to prove anything." "I'm not proving anything," he interrupted gently. "I'm showing up, like you did." For hours, they worked side by side, handing out meals, laughing with the children, cleaning up after. Slowly, the wall between them began to crumble. She watched him carry heavy crates, kneel to fix a child's shoelace, and smile like he'd forgotten who he was supposed to be. When the sun began to set, the last of the children waved goodbye. The golden light spilled through the cracked windows, wrapping them in a quiet warmth. Maya wiped her hands and sighed softly. "You don't belong here, Daniel. You have an empire to run." He turned toward her, eyes gentle. "Maybe this is what I'm meant to run." She let out a tired laugh. "You don't even know what that means." "I do," he said. "It means I finally found something worth building that doesn't have my name on it." Her smile faltered. "You'll forget this tomorrow. People like you always do." Stepped closer, voice low and steady. "I won't, because people like you don't let me." Silence. Her eyes shimmered, uncertain, searching for the lie in his words, but found none. "Maya," he said softly, "come work with me. Not for me, with me. Help me change how this place runs. You see things I never could." She hesitated. "You trust me with that?" "I already do," he replied. "You've been changing lives long before I even knew your name." The room felt still, sacred. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. Maya exhaled, her resistance melting like mist in sunlight. For the first time, she didn't feel small beside him. She felt seen. "All right," she whispered finally, a faint smile tugging her lips. "But only if we do it my way." Daniel laughed softly. Wouldn't have it any other way. As they stepped outside together, the city lights glimmered across the damp streets, the same streets where they'd first met. But this time, there was no judgment, no distance, no disguises. Just a people from different worlds, walking side by side towards something neither of them had planned, but both deeply needed. And as the night air wrapped around them, Daniel glanced at her and said quietly, "You know, Maya, I think that night you showed up dressed like a beggar. You might have saved more than just that boy." She turned to him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" He smiled softly, eyes warm. "You saved me, too." For once, Maya didn't look away. She just smiled, real, unguarded, and the world finally felt right. The rain had finally stopped, but the city still shimmered as if the heavens had left behind their tears. Inside the garden, lit with soft fairy lights, Ilara stood frozen, her palms trembling, her heart caught between disbelief and wonder. Around her, the air smelled of roses and wet soil, fresh and pure. She had never imagined standing in a place like this again, a garden of hope, rebuilt from broken dreams, funded by the same man who had once seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. Ethan stood a few steps away, watching her. He wasn't in his usual sharp suit today. Instead, he wore a white shirt rolled at the sleeves, his jacket resting on a wooden bench nearby. His eyes held something far softer than business, something human, vulnerable. "It's yours," he said simply. "The shelter, the garden, everything we built belongs to you now." Lara turned to him, stunned. "Ethan, you can't mean that. This was your company's project, your idea." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but you gave it a soul. You taught me what real wealth looks like." His gaze softened as he stepped closer. "I've spent years building skyscrapers and buying companies, Lara, but that night when you walked into that restaurant, drenched and shivering, you showed me what courage truly is. You weren't dressed for a date. You were dressed in truth." Her eyes filled with tears, the kind that burn and heal at the same time. "Everyone laughed at me that night," she whispered. "Even I wanted to run. But you didn't." "I couldn't," he replied, "because I saw someone braver than anyone in that room. Someone who wasn't afraid to be real." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of distant laughter and rustling leaves filled the silence. The garden lights twinkled like tiny stars fallen from the sky, wrapping them in a quiet glow. Ethan reached out, his hand gentle, inviting but not demanding. "Ilara," he said softly, "you don't have to hide anymore. You don't need to pretend to be someone else. The world will keep judging. Let them. You and I will keep building something different, something kind." She looked down, tears glistening on her cheeks, then lifted her chin with a quiet strength he had always admired. "All I ever wanted was to help others see their worth," she said. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot my own." "Then let's remind you," he murmured, and slowly he took her hands. The air grew still, as if the universe itself paused to listen. The children in the distance ran past laughing, holding small flowers they'd picked from the garden. A single petal floated down between them, landing softly on their joined hands. In that moment, it wasn't about pity or wealth or even love in the ordinary sense. It was about recognition to souls who had seen each other through the fog of judgment and pain, and found something rare, peace. Ilara smiled through her tears. "You know," she said with a quiet laugh, "I almost didn't show up that day. I was sure you'd turn away the moment you saw me." He chuckled, shaking his head. "I think I was the one who showed up that night, not you. I just didn't know it yet." As the first streak of morning sunlight broke through the clouds, it illuminated the garden in gold. Ilara stepped forward and rested her head gently on his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around her not as a savior, but as an equal. The camera of life would have zoomed out here, the garden in full bloom, the light glowing across their faces, the laughter of children blending with the song of birds. But if one listened closely beneath all of that beauty, there was something deeper, an unspoken promise that love doesn't always arrive dressed in perfection. Sometimes it walks in wearing torn clothes and rain-soaked shoes, and yet it carries the kind of beauty that changes lives forever. End scene. A split-second act of bravery creates an unbreakable bond.